Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Ainam Namaskritya Cheva Narottamam Devyam Saraswatyam Vyasam Jojan Tirayat Astam Preshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhakti Bhakti Naishtaki. Very means upon this. One should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead. Rishi, regular attendance in classes on service, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed. Loving service on the personality of Godhead, whose praise and transcendental song is established. close to books that we just read translation first word that part. Reading from Canto 1, Chapter 2, text 21. So we'll chant the Sanskrit first and follow the songs. Vidyate hridaya granti Chidyante sarva samshayaha Yante chasya karmani Krishta evatmanishvare Vidyate hridaya grantis Chidyante sarva samshayaha Yante chasya karmani Krishta evatmanishvare Vidyate hridaya grantis Chedyante sarva samashaya Shiyante chasya karmani Krishta evatmanishvare Vidyate hridaya grantis Chidyante sarva samshayaha Shiyante chasya karmani Krishta evatmanishvare Vidya hridaya grantis Chidyante sarva samshayaha Shiyante chasya karmani Krishta evatmanishvare Vidyate hridaya grantis Chidyante sarva samashaya Shiyante chasya karmani Krishta evatmanishvare Vidyate hridaya grantis Chidyante sarva samshayaha Shiyante chasya karmani Krishta evatmanishvare Read the word-to-word translation. The ears, the heart, granthi, knots, Chidyante, cut to pieces, sarva, all, samshayaha, misgivings, shiyante, terminated, cha, and, asya, is, karmani, chain of fruitive actions, drishte, having seen, eva, certainly, atmani, unto the self, Ishvare, dominating. Let's read the translation together, please. Thus, the knot in the heart is pierced, and all misgivings are cut to pieces. The chain of fruitive actions is terminated when one sees the self as master. Purport by His Divine Grace Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Attaining scientific knowledge of the personality of Godhead means seeing one's own self simultaneously. As far as the identity of the living being as spirit self is concerned, there are a number of speculations and misgivings. The materialist does not believe in the existence of the spirit self, and empiric philosophers believe in the impersonal feature of the whole spirit without individuality of the living beings. But the transcendentalists affirm that the soul and the supersoul are two different identities, qualitatively one, but quantitatively different. There are many other theories, but all these different speculations are once cleared off as soon as Sri Krishna is realized in truth by the process of Bhakti Yoga. Anyone else?
Sri Krishna is like the sun, and the materialistic speculations about the absolute truth are like the darkest midnight. As soon as the Krishna sun is arisen within one's heart, the darkness of materialistic speculations about the absolute truth and the living being is at once cleared off. In the presence of the sun, the darkness cannot stand, and the relative truths that were hidden within the dense darkness of ignorance become clearly manifested by the mercy of Krishna, who is residing in everyone's heart as the supersoul. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, verse 11, the Lord says that in order to show special favor to his pure devotees, he personally eradicates the dense darkness of all misgivings by switching on the light of pure knowledge within the heart of a devotee. Therefore, because of the personality of Godhead's taking charge of illuminating the heart of his devotee, certainly a devotee engaged in his service in transcendental love cannot remain in darkness. He comes to know everything of the absolute and the relative truths. The devotee cannot remain in darkness, and because a devotee is enlightened by the personality of Godhead, his knowledge is certainly perfect. This is not the case for those who speculate on the absolute truth by dint of their own limited power of approach. Perfect knowledge is called parampara, or deductive knowledge, coming down from the authority to the submissive oral receiver, who is bona fide by service and surrender. One cannot challenge the authority of the Supreme and know him also at the same time. He reserves the right of not being exposed to such a challenging spirit of an insignificant spark of the whole, a spark subjected to the control of illusory energy. The devotees are submissive, and therefore the transcendental knowledge descends from the personality of Godhead to Brahma, and from Brahma to his sons and disciples in succession. This process is helped by the supersoul within such devotees. That is the perfect way of learning transcendental knowledge. This enlightenment perfectly enables the devotee to distinguish spirit from matter, because the knot of spirit and matter is untied by the Lord. This knot is called ahankara, and it falsely obliges a living being to become identified with matter. As soon as this knot is loosened, therefore, all the clouds of doubt are at once cleared off. One sees his master and fully engages himself in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, making a full termination of the chain of fruitive action. In material existence, a living being creates his own chain of fruitive work and enjoys the good and bad effects of those actions life after life. But as soon as he engages himself in the loving service of the Lord, he at once becomes free from the chain of karma. His actions no longer create any reactions.
Read the translation together one more time, please. Thus the knot in the heart is pierced, and all misgivings are cut to pieces. The chain of fruitive actions is terminated when one sees the self as master. So, thought about starting our discussion by focusing on this knot that's being talked about, right? So the way the knot is started, right, is basically by our sense of enjoyment or our pursuit of happiness in so-called not the right way. So when we try to experience happiness, or when we try to um, see ourselves the master and try to enjoy in that way, that that creates that knot in the heart. And it's actually really easy to even get get those knots more untangled. Um, Even so, when we're trying to follow in the process of bhakti, if we're not really being careful, right? So what I mean by that is, if I'll share the story that some of you may have already heard. So there's a spiritual master who asks his disciple to read Bhagavad Gita every day, and so the disciple tries to follow that instruction really carefully, and try to read Bhagavad Gita every day. But then in his room there's this little mouse that keeps on bothering uh, while he's reading, and then he chews off the pages of the Bhagavad Gita. So he's like, well, this rat is being a nuisance, and so trying to take care of the rat, he thinks, well, it may be a good idea if I get a cat, right? And then the cat will take care of the rat. So then he gets the cat to take care of the rat, right? And then the cat does take care of the rat, but then the cat needs to fed milk, right? So the cat needs milk, and so he needs to go to the store and get milk a couple times a day. And so he thinks, well, it would be actually, I think it would be a better idea if I get a cow, because then the cow will take care of providing the milk for the cat, right? So then he gets a cow, and then the cow is providing the milk for the cat, but then he has to take care of the cow. He has to go milk the cow certain times, right? And so in this process, like, it's really easy for us to see it, because we have heard the story multiple times and we have that perspective. But then when you are in the situation yourself, it's actually not that easy. And then later the fact, when we're seeing it, we realize, oh, like, what was I thinking, right? So then with the with the cow, now he has to take care of the cow, so he thinks, well, it would be easier if I get married and I have a partner, and my wife can take care of the cow. And so then he gets married, and then the wife is taking care of the cow, but he has to take care of the wife, and then they have kids. And then after some time, the spiritual master is going by that area, and he asks the disciple, like, how are you doing in reading your Bhagavad Gita? He's like, well, I'm trying, but I don't really have kids and a wife. I have a cow, I have a cat, right? And so that all started by taking care of that, a rat, right? So sometimes we see these small rats in our life, and we tend to over endeavor to solve that problem of the rat, right? Or over engineer it. So those in India, engineering students, they try to, like, see things with more complex um, mindset, or makes things more complicated. So there are so many mosquitoes, especially in summertime. So you have these screens, right, on top of your bed. So before you go to bed, you put a screen on top of your bed, so that way you don't get bit by mosquitoes in the night. So the student got a hole in the mosquito net, right? So something chewed through it. So now, since he had a hole, um, it's like, well, mosquitoes will come through. So what do I do to fix the problem? So what he did was he made another hole in the net, right? Why is he making another hole? So he made a hole. There was a hole here, and he made another hole, and then he put like a U pipe in there, right? So the mosquito goes through this hole, goes in the pipe, and then comes out on the other hole. Right? So that was his, rather than just suing the hole, that was his solution to the problem, right? So sometimes we tend to over engineer, right? Over things like, oh, the solution cannot be that simple, right? There must be more to it, right? So when if we're not careful, right, we can basically um, make these tie even more knots on top of these knots, right? And if any one of you have any experience, like untying these knots, that can be a really painful process requiring a lot of patience. And so um, the beauty is, it's saying right here, right, the process of bhakti can pierce through that knot, right? And then you can basically, the misgivings are cut into pieces, right? So you don't really, the process of bhakti can pierce it and you can cut it. So it's not really trying to untie that knot, which can be so painful. The process of bhakti is so beautiful that it simplifies things and it, lets you cut those misgivings or those knots into pieces. Right? And so going kind of deeper on the topic of the knots, right? So even in the process of bhakti, you can have so-called good knots and bad knots, right? So I'll give a couple examples of the good knots, right? And then I would like to kind of hear from you what the examples that you can think of that for good knots or bad knots. So some of the things that I thought of like are as the good knots can be education or status, right? A lot of times, like including myself, like um, we don't feel comfortable practicing Krishna consciousness, among certain people, right? Like so, I remember um, when I worked in Jacksonville, and there would be an art market in the evening that was really close to my work, right? And then the devotees will come once a month and they'll do Harinam. And I was always shy to not do Harinam with devotees because I didn't want my coworkers to see me and then ask me questions like, well, what is this? What do you practice? And so I was just, I was kind of apprehensive about it, right? So it was like a good knot like of my education or my working, stopping me from practicing um, Krishna consciousness, right? And so similarly, you can have bad knots, right? For example, like fear or anger, right? Like a lot of times, if you're really angry towards someone, right? It's just that the feeling is so strong that it overcomes everything else, right? And it overcomes our um, devotion or it overcomes our endeavor to practice bhakti, right? So those are the like an example of a good knot or a bad knot. So I'm curious to hear thoughts about like if you personally have experience or can think of some of the good knots in your life, if you would like to share any thoughts on so-called good knots that are common to
I think this phone. Thinking of my personal life, but in more broadly human terms, like technology and this phone, it helps me keep notes, take time, research information. It could be good for my bhakti, like I'm reading. At the same time, it's just like is a time killer. Like I'm just end up scrolling. So I try to engage it in the best way, but it ends up tying me up and like just destroying time, robbing me of dopamine,
Yeah,
etc.
that's a good example. Yeah. Anyone else?
Because I spent so much time in my adolescence and early adulthood studying music, and I did it for my undergraduate. I approach music in a very like like cerebral way, and I'm always trying to analyze almost anything that I hear. It's like I can't turn it off. It's like I'm trying to analyze it and figure out, okay, what's that note, what's that chord, and so it can kind of sometimes it gets in the way of doing kirtan because I'm not able to uh, access more like more of an emotional or um, I guess like heartfelt uh, impetus for doing it or for like participating in it.
Any bad knots that someone you think that cure that should be?
So I do my service and I like to do a good job. I think this is a good knot. Um, but sometimes I want to like over perfect it and do it so fast that it stops me from enjoying it as I do it. Because I'm just worried about doing it in a certain way.
Just building on that, perfection is definitely one of those good knots where it comes from like, oh, we want to do the best job we can, and then we just can't accept what's there. Drive us a little crazy.
Yeah. Well, it's yeah. Perfection is enemy. Perfection is enemy of good. Is that right? The same. So yeah, at least the I think the thought of trying to do something perfectly for Krishna is really beautiful. But then as long as it's not stopping us from actually doing it, right? I think um, it's still worth it, right? Because we don't want to do a sloppy job in our service, um, but at the same time realizing, right, like we're in this material world and imperfections will be there. As long as we're trying our best to do it and being surrendered to the fact that there will be some imperfections in our service and asking um, for prayers to Krishna and devotees to want to improve it, and then also giving us, being surrendered to the process because it will take time to work on those. Any other good or bad knots that someone wants to share?
I was thinking about communication. Um, like I said, that's something that could be so helpful when it comes to doing service. And then I feel like it's a learned skill, and I come across trouble with the way that I communicate directions, in my service to others, or take directions poorly, then that can be a hindrance. And then for sure, easily for me, you know, uh, a difficult knot to untangle is resentment. And I feel like I've hung on to resentments from old relationships specifically for decades, and tried to work them out different angles. And it does take time and a lot of effort, but yeah.
Chaitanya Charan came up with this thing, optimizing and maximizing. So maximizing is perfection, and optimizing. I think about this a lot when I'm dressing Prabhupada. I try to maximize the details and stuff, and then at just one point I have to optimize. I'm not going to get this thing done.
Else?
Just listening to everybody's answers, I'm thinking like, what is the force that's pushing like this progress? And I think of my ego. So sometimes when I'm comparing myself to others, it pushes me to do better, but then I become obsessed. And the very competitive, and it like takes over, where I'm not doing it for the better of myself anymore or the better of others. It's just like this narcissistic fuel where it was a good servant until it became my master. And then I just like, I'm not even in control. It's just like this egoic entity that needs this status and recognition. Like you saw the progress, right? You're seeing how good I am at this. Where it just like there's a fine line to where it's like good until it's not good anymore.
So yeah, so we all experience these good knots and bad knots, right? So but the beauty of process of bhakti, right? So Prabhupada translates bhakti to devotional service, is that it, as the verse is saying, it pierces through those knots, right? And the way we're able to do that is by really realizing, right? So when we talk about service, right, you're serving someone, right? So there is a relationship of servitude, right? So there's a servant and a master. Right? So when we realize that actually the nature of the soul is to serve, and then we are practicing that, then we are able to feel that happiness, right? There's this another like an example that Chaitanya Sri Prabhu gives in his lecture is like there's a boy in a really remote village in Africa, right? And he has never been outside that remote village, and there's this like really tiny village without any kind of social media, any kind of way to reach outside that remote village. And one day he goes to his mom and he asks for pizza. It's like, I want pizza. His mom doesn't know what he's talking about, right? And so like, what is this pizza, and like, how does he know about it, right? So the example that Chaitanya Sri Prabhu is giving this for is, it's like where when we all are seeking this eternal happiness, right? We're all seeking this eternal joy. Actually, if we think of it, is no one has experienced that in this material world, right? None of us have experienced that in this material world, right? So where is that coming from? What's the source of it, right? If you have never seen it, and if you've never experienced it, right? It's like that boy in that remote village in Africa, right? He has never, like, where's the thought of pizza coming from if he has not seen it, or if he has never experienced it, right? What does it look like, right? So similarly, where is that thought of that eternal happiness that we are all seeking for, right? Where's that coming from if we have never really experienced it or seen it in this material world? Right? It's because we all have experienced it, right, in the spiritual world, in that relationship with Krishna, right? And so now we're kind of searching for that if we're searching for it in the material world in different ways, we're getting disappointed, right? Or we're looking in the wrong places and getting disheartened, right? So the reason we're looking for it is because of our experience with feeling that being able to serve Krishna, and we can actually do that same. And that's the beauty of the process of bhakti, is that, as Prabhupada will explain, right, it's the path and it's the goal, right? So we can actually experience it as we are progressing in that path, right? In the material world itself, right? And we all have experienced that, tiny level of reciprocation from Krishna, whether that be, serving someone, or, cooking prasadam, or being in the kirtan, and, all of a sudden we're just feeling this like extreme joy, right? extreme happiness. We just cannot stop smiling, right? Like, and it's just so beautiful that you can actually see, right? It's not something intangible. It's not something like, oh, I practice this bhakti because then, at the end of this life, I want to be with Krishna. Actually, you can see the reciprocation, and you can see the results of those tiny efforts that we're trying to put in, and Krishna reciprocates, right, to basically help us to continue in that path, right? Because again, it's not it's a simple process, but it's not easy, right? So we will get a lot of challenges throughout in the path, but Krishna and the devotees will continue to reciprocate with us to help us to go through that one challenge to the next one, to the next one, right? And one of my um, favorite quote is like, success is going from one failure to the other without losing enthusiasm, right? And so we can think of that in our process of bhakti, right? Like going from one challenge to the other, but without losing that enthusiasm that we actually first have when we come to devotional service, because we all have some kind of um, some bad habits, right? That are when we first started coming into Krishna consciousness, we can see that easily kind of like that switch, and we're able to feel that happiness because we're able to give a lot of those bad habits right away. But then at after a certain time, we may feel that plateau. We may feel there's the hard process of anartha nivritti, right? Which basically cleaning all the defects and the fault, and that can be really challenging, right? But going from that one step to the next without losing the enthusiasm can really help us and can really nourish us. Um, that can really help us um, to continue to get through these knots. Right? And so it talks about when one. So there's I was hearing this lecture, and in the lecture it was saying you can be a good servant if you can be a good master. You can be a good master if you can be a good servant. Right? I didn't kind of follow what it really meant. Like how can you be a good servant when you be a good master, right? So the explanation was actually you can be a good servant if you can be a good master of your senses. Right? If you can master your senses well, then you can serve well. And if you can serve Krishna, if you can be a good servant, serving the devotees, serving the spiritual master, serving Krishna, then you can actually be a good master of your senses, right? We all have experienced it. Trying to control senses is really hard by ourselves, right? Like Arjuna, um, who is who actually Krishna calls him the controller of the sleep, right? In Bhagavad Gita, right? And all of us knows like you cannot. It's so hard to be able to control our sleep, right? So controlling our sense, and Arjuna is actually saying, Krishna is actually easier to control the wind than control the senses, right? But then when we serve Krishna, um, Krishna helps us to be able to control our senses, right? So when we can be being a good master helps us to be a good servant, and being a good servant helps us to be a good master. So that's the thought I want to end the class by. Any questions or comments?
I really liked how you asked us all what are some of our knots, because this process is like such a process of introspection, and it's funny, like everyone mentioned the good knots, and I don't think anyone, John was brave enough to mention a bad knot, but yeah, because I was thinking when you asked that question, I'm like, yeah, I'm not sharing that this or this that I feel that I don't like. It's like so dirty.
It's like the knot has grease on it too. Like it's it's like been tarred. Yeah. So
Yeah, I mean, that's the, one of the six loving exchanges, right? We can reveal our heart to other devotees, right? In confidence. So yeah, like that's the beauty of the process, right? Like when we are able to build those relationships, um, and again another thing of like where you can see the process of bhakti now, right? You can experience it is by those relationships, right? And it's like from my personal experience, there was no way like I could have those strong relationships if it wasn't for me trying to practice Krishna consciousness and these devotees trying to practice Krishna consciousness. We can relate with one another so nicely, and our relationship is strong because it's based on Krishna. Right? Krishna is the center and foundation of that relationship, and then that helps us to be able to really, like yeah, like it's so hard to share that on with among like at a public forum, but once you have this relationship, kind of really helps to just get it out of your heart, because sometimes just like it just weighs if you cannot share it either, right? So that's again the beauty of the process, that our acharyas and Srila Prabhupada has given us. Other thoughts?
I just wanted to say that these knots keep us in lower modes. Like the knot that I had mentioned where I want to do my service like in a certain way, it makes me in the mode of passion, and it really pulls me down in so many ways. Yeah, I just want to say.
I really like that quote. Success is moving from one failure to another. It makes me think of martial arts and this Chinese concept known as Shoshin, which is the beginner's mind, to be able to approach any endeavor as a white belt, like, no, I'm here to learn. Even if like Steven said, a bunch of musical things, you can get convoluted. And then same with cooking. Like I know so many different techniques and flavor combinations that you end up spoiling it by adding too much. I've noticed in myself, I'm kind of an extremist where I adopted the beginner's mindset, and then I'm like, nothing can stick to me. I'm like, so I just kept moving forward without taking time to reflect. It would just be like, there's a delicate balance from, so I took that, oh, I can keep, I'm so good at failing. I can just keep going and going, but I never took the time to like humble myself and learn from the experience or just take the time to reflect. I just kept pushing forward. So if somebody like beats me up on the mat, I get up and I'm like, let's go again. Let's go again. Instead of taking the time to be like, hey, what was I doing wrong? How did you get me? And if you trust somebody, they'll just tell you like, yeah, you're like in the mode of passion, you're just frantically moving from one position to another. And so that really triggered a thought process in me. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, so the process of introspection is really important, right? So that way, as you were giving the example, when you get, knocked down, you really kind of take the time, what was it, that did that, right? If you're kind of seeing it from the material world perspective, or, trying to practice bhakti, is like, what are that fault? Like, what is it that that got me here? And then how can I work on it? What do I need to do? And so, yeah, the process of introspection is really important, to be able to help you kind of, not commit the same mistakes, right? We'll continue to make mistakes, but at least, try not to make the same ones, or similar ones. Any other thoughts at this point?
Thank you, Lila, Kishor. Sorry, earlier I was dealing with some scheduling here, but I listened and I appreciated your point that how much of a predicament we are in, considering that we have no point of reference, we have no experience, but still in the purport, Prabhupada said that Krishna turns on the switch, referencing from the Gita 10:11. So I want to see if how's that happening? Why would Krishna do that and give us that point of reference, or glimpse, even a glimpse of point of reference in the case of a devotee? And how can we? Does it stay on, or the switch goes off sometimes? How can we keep it on? How can we increase that illuminating effect that Krishna has in our heart?
Yeah. So if we, when we first wake up in the morning, right? Like when we sleep, the room is really dark, right? And you even turn on like the little bit of a light, and, your eyes just don't want to open, right? It's just really hard, even like for a dim light, right? And then slowly your eyes get adjusted to it, and then you can go in the brighter light. But then it's like someone just puts the flashlight on your eye, it's like, oh, that's too bright. You're still too bright. And then when we go out and try to look directly into the sun, it's like that the example that Prabhupada is giving, that of that, Krishna is like that sun moving the darkness. So I think the way I see it is like you can be in somewhere in that spectrum, right? It's like when we first come in, it's just such a mode of darkness that even if someone is in such a mode of ignorance and so much darkness, right? Like the devotee is trying to give a book and the person just doesn't want to take it, right? It's just that even that dim light, like no, like I'm not ready, right? And then slowly I realized, well, actually, like it's so dark, like I need to get out of here, right? And then you try to take like a little bit of that dim light and get adjusted to it. And then from that dim light, you're like, okay, actually, it's still not bright enough, right? And then kind of going to that next level, and then next level is like the different process of devotion service, and the different level of being the beginner, and the medium, and the three kind of devotees at the levels. So I think the way, so in terms of kind of the couple of things that I was thinking of on your point of question was, one is it's for us to kind of see like where we are, right? Like Krishna is that bright light, and is always trying to take care of that ignorance, that darkness in our heart, and we're slowly trying to open our eyes from that dim light to getting out to brighter and brighter. But then again, I think the second thing you asked, like, yeah, like we always, as souls, Krishna is giving us that independence, right? We can always go walk back in that dark room, like like I choose not to see the light, and go back into the darkness again, so that we always have the independence, right, to go one way or the other. But Krishna is giving us those reciprocation, or Krishna is showing us those dim light, is to be able to give that taste for us to continue to go to do that, right? Like if like I have two little kids, and my daughter, she loves sweets, right? So like my son, not so much. My daughter, like her day revolves around treats. So it's like she eats treats. It's actually kind of like her real food, and her food is kind of treat. Like we have to force her to eat it. But the point I'm trying to make is like, once you got that taste of the treat, like you can be like, Lila, you need to finish your food lunch first, and then you can get your treat. And then you can get her to eat anything you want, right? And so, I mean, the realization that I kind of have had through that experience is like, Krishna is giving us that taste of that little treat, right? And then we're ready to put in the work, because we have like had that little bit of taste, and we know like what it feels like. And so we're willing to put in the work, right? Think of if like we wouldn't have that little bit of taste, and you're just putting in work, and you're putting in work, and there's no reciprocation. Either one, you'll get exhausted, or two, you'll lose the faith in the process. Like it doesn't work, right? Like I'm not feeling anything. I'm not seeing any difference in my life. It doesn't work. You watch it, and you try something else, just kind of how we have done it with different things in material life, right? So that's, I think, the beauty of that, brightness or the process of the Srila Prabhupada has given us, that we get all the treats on our way, and then we are willing to put in the work because we know, it tastes so sweet, and it tastes sweeter than anything we have tasted in the material world, right? Like as I was saying, like we all have experienced that big happiness or smile, like dancing in the kirtan with the devotees, and you're like, oh, like this is what is it about? This is why I'm still here, and this is why I'm willing to put in the work, is because of that joy that I feel dancing in the kirtan with the devotees, where I won't feel it anywhere else. I don't know if that kind of answers your question. Any other thoughts or questions? Jai. Krishna Bhardoya Moy Kori Bari Jiva Joy Sva Prasad and Kilo Bhai Sriram Gopal Radha Krishna Gurda Vrinda Kos Kavya Gitai Jai Mai Jai Shiva Prabhupada